Welcome back to the Rhodes to Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rhodes. Really appreciate you tuning in this week. This is actually my first repeat guest. I had Chris Manske on the podcast last week. Not only did he knock it out of the park, but I mentioned in my introduction there that we recorded the podcast in late February. Chris's expertise, I mentioned last week, he's a certified financial planner, but his true expertise lies in this disaster or crises preparation. He's got a book coming out later this year, The Prepared Investor. Fast forward a few weeks, I interviewed him in late February. You fast forward a bit, we are in the midst of a crisis here. I reached out to several sort of crisis experts and planners. I had several responses. But I had such a good interview with Chris, and after doing some networking, I thought it made the most sense to bring him back on. I've got a lot planned here. I'd like to unpack what he's seeing, his take on just everything in flux. And I'm going to spend some cycles here talking through both those that need help, those that are, for the lack of a better term, suffering or that feel that they need some sort of financial assistance. I'm also going to try to spend some cycles here talking through those that are looking to really take advantage of this opportunity and they feel they've built some disposable income or they've had some money set aside for this drop. I'm going to do my best to extract some tips from him on where do we put that cash. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. Let's jump right in.
It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health. My kids and my spouse, financially sound.
Chris, welcome back, man. Part two. For the listeners, this is going to be what feels like, it's 2 episodes in 7 days. For you and I, this is 2 episodes in 29 days. We recorded our last one 29 days ago. And man, have things changed. have things changed. We're in such a weird time. For anybody that's tuning in, maybe at a far later date, we are right in the midst of this coronavirus. And we discussed on the last podcast here, you have a book coming out later this year called The Prepared Investor. And I feel just based on what we're dealing with, what's going on in the market, what's going on, across the globe, what better person to bring back to just right in the meat of things and kind of unpack what are you seeing and what's going on. And I've got a lot of questions. I opened it up, as I always do, to the social. Several folks submitted their own questions, and so I've got some of those that I'll layer in here. I really, really appreciate your time, man.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I really enjoyed our last talk, and you're right to help listeners understand it's a different world than a month ago when we last were speaking. And I'm glad to offer whatever clarity I can in this tough time.
It's the, just prepping for this podcast, I re-listened to it and it's a little spooky in that in the first just few minutes, you hint at, or you actually you mention the coronavirus. Obviously at its time, it's so new. And you mentioned, there's this coronavirus out there. And I saw a few days ago, it had an impact on the market where it dropped 600 points. And then this morning, this is you on the podcast, this morning, it dropped another 900 points. And so, it's interesting to reflect back on the time that we were there, at that time and kind of see where we're at, fast forward 29 days. At the time we were making the point how those two, while significant drops, if you have a diversified portfolio, those drops, while impacting, as impactful. It's just crazy how things have fast forward and flown. And here we are 29 days later, things have really escalated.
It's true. So to kind of walk through that timeline, January, it really was just a medical and health issue that didn't even touch our shores until the 17th or 18th of January when they started screening for it at, some of our major airports. But it still was not that big of a deal. In fact, if you look at a history, a really fun thing to do is to look at the history of searches on coronavirus, because Google provides us analytics, and you can see that from about February 4th until Valentine's Day, the searches just dropped like crazy. There was very little interest, and it was looking like, okay, this is going to be like SARS and MERS, and all the other, H1N1 swine flu, that they existed and they made an impact, but they weren't a financial crisis. But then we had the quarantine that took place in Italy. So quarantine in China felt like, wow, that's China. Look what they're doing. It's crazy that that's happening over there. But then when we have, Europe, which is, just a step away from us, Europe is the West, and that we see a major quarantine over there. Then that was, Friday, Saturday in March. Then come March 9th or 10th, just going off of memory, all of a sudden we see the start of the meltdown because, now we realize there's something here. And in fact, some people say that the virus is not really the crisis. It's the quarantine. That's the crisis. We've been through viruses before, but add in a little mix of social media and we have this is just a special time.
Special time is it's the best. I keep calling it in my sales calls an interesting time. It's what I called it on social. There's no words to explain it. I think that's the first question I was gonna to open up to you is I was gonna start with an easy one, and what the hell is going on? Obviously there's a virus out here that's causing emotional damage. It's causing economic damage. Obviously personal financial damage, right? There's several individuals that are now dealing with financial burdens or hardships. I'd like to get maybe your perspective, just the perspective from an expert here on, what do you see going on, maybe both in the individual and in the market?
Well, I think a good answer to what's going on is you've got just a convergence of a lot of different factors. So it depends on maybe your politics, it depends on your personality and what factor is going to touch you the most. But I feel that there is a certain element of truth to a lot of different perspectives. So just to kind of walk you through what I mean, we've got the virus, and the virus is a real threat, especially to certain members of our community. For you and I and our age group, the virus is probably less of a worry, but there are members of the community that the virus is a very real threat. So you've got that medical issue. Then on top of that, you've got social media. And social media is amplifying something that in my book I call the lottery effect. It's a big part of what creates the panic in these downturns. When you've got this idea that, hey, I see the billboard, I could win $100 million, I'm going to buy a ticket. It doesn't really connect to your brain well that you're not going to win. You're not going to win. And social media helps to amplify, I've seen pictures of people's loved ones that have coronavirus. I never saw any pictures of loved ones who had H1N1 swine flu. I never saw pictures of loved ones who had SARS. So, I've seen that. It's very difficult for my mind to disconnect that emotion to the mathematical probability of me getting this virus. It's so hard. So we've got social media amplifying it. And then with social media, there's another problem or just factor, which is you've got a lot of misinformation, and some of it, there's a ring of fact. Doesn't mean there is fact, but there's a ring of factual feeling to it. And you get these questions, well, who gains by this? And it starts to turn into a political issue. So you've got the politics that kind of gets pulled into anything these days, especially in an election year, the virus itself, the lottery effect where we all feel like, oh, if we touch anything, we might get the virus. And then the next real big factor is the quarantine. When our nation's leaders say, shut down, you can't leave your home, and we as a community, a state, a nation have never dealt with that before, there's the new unknown. Every financial crisis that's worth its salt has a new unknown, whether it's a plane flying into a building or a very realistic fear that our monetary system is about to collapse. That new unknown exists with the quarantine. And so most people, I think they stop right there. But there is more to this particular crisis. when you consider that just 2 days after Italy's quarantine is when the news broke that Russia and Saudi Arabia were going to disagree on the price of oil. So with the spigots open and the oil price dropping like crazy, there's a lot here. And you know what is, and I hope I'm not sounding too negative with my last thought here, but what is not being talked about, and thank goodness we can only handle so much negativity, but in the news, kind of as a subtitle, there's some folks that are catching on that Iran is starting to have a certain amount of nuclear material. That it used to be super far out that they could create something deadly. And now it's like, well, it's not so hard to imagine anymore. And that just was reported on. So, there's a lot going on.
I mean, pulling us in all different directions and with so many variables. I mean, I came in ready to talk about the coronavirus, and then you hear there's 4 or 5 others, and it kind of makes sense why we're being, pulled down and why everything's kind of the ebbs and flows here, which is going to kind of feed into my next question of I'm going to show my ignorance here in that if we look back at the last conversation and we talk about the market drops 600 points and then it drops another 900 points. And if you look at the S&P 500 now or whatever market you decide to throw up on, if you look at some sort of big index fund, something that holds a lot, you're going to see this giant drop and this spike, and this, especially right now. The basic question I'm going to ask here is, what exactly is causing that drop, right? That the initial drop, you saw a drop of 600 points and 900 points. Is that a little bit of fear in people, a bunch of people pulling their money out of the stock market, and that's what's causing that? Or are there other influences on the market aside from putting money in, putting money out, that's causing the market to dip a little bit?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think, in a spirit of humility, I don't know that I have the answer, but I have a answer.
Okay.
And a good answer is that fear absolutely plays a role in this. People are selling out of concern that the market's going to fall and they don't want to be a part of it. They're selling because they're worried they're going to need their money. This is absolutely a liquidity crisis. If we're shutting the economy down and people can't go to work, well, where are they going to get their money? Well, they go to that savings account that they had invested in the stock market, and they might sell. They feel forced to sell. But fear is certainly a role in this. In today's world, though, that can't be the only answer, because we're so hyper-connected. There are people all over the planet. There are institutions that they move slowly, and there's groups of people that are involved in decision making. And then you've got large pots of money that it's analytics and software and quote unquote robots that make the decisions. So fear is maybe the kindling, but what makes the fire and what makes all the fireworks happen is all those things coming together. And that's what a bear market is. This is not the first time. I saw the same thing with the technology bubble, same thing with 9/11, same thing with financial crisis. Nothing here is spectacularly different, except for the thing that makes it different. And that's in every crisis.
Yeah. That the newness. I'm going to get there. Actually, I've got a quote from you in the last one. If I could continue sort of the same thought here of maybe it's a little bit of fear driving the market, or a little bit of fear driving the downward turn. Let's kind of work our way up to today. I guess I'm going to kind of confirm this. We've gotten to this point by people freaking out, seeing the market sort of do this tank, realizing, oh shit, I need this money, or I don't want to see this go any further, or potentially hit zero, right? And so they freak out, they pull their money out. I mean, companies aren't losing their value here, right? Like airlines aren't getting worse. Companies haven't launched any bad applications or a bad software update or taken a wrong turn or announced that they're against, that they're racist or whatever. Like there's nothing that's caused a company to have this downward shift. Is this truly, I mean, to your point there, some robots shifting some funds around, but just fear driven? This is a fear driven crisis?
Yes. Yeah. This is what bear markets are made of, is they're made of fear of the unknown. They're made of, I've watched my account go up. I have more than I had 5-10 years ago. I want to make sure I keep it.
Man,
that's what causes the pendulum to swing. We're our human nature, even though there are robots involved, I mean, human beings, we are the ones that buy and sell on the market. The market's an auction, and so the more buyers, the more it goes up, the more sellers, the more it goes down. There won't be ever a steady, simple, straight curve up. It's going to be a pendulum. And so that's what we're experiencing now, is the pendulum running the other way.
This is a part of the conversation I was really pumped about, and you've hinted at it a couple of times, and I have kind of bypassed it, quote unquote, last week, and in part one of this, I asked you to define a crisis. What do you have a definition? And you gave me something new, something unexpected, and something that's framed a little differently. And for people to respond to that crisis, the newness of it is the biggest piece. And so we went on and we talked through several examples in that podcast. We talked about the 2008 recession. We talked about school shootings. We talked about 9/11. We talked about going to war. And you mentioned, throughout all of these years and all of these crises and issues, the stock market has served, for you and really for everyone, as this giant data source and this data pool that if you're able to tap into it and start to draw some parallels and find commonality to understand what's going on in the market and how we respond and how people react, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's just this giant data source that starts from way back when, and you can follow the trends and understand how people respond and react. To me, and you've said this a couple of times, I think I'll be interested in your thought here. To me, this feels a little different. In the examples that we mentioned there, the recession, the school shooting, 9/11, going to war, from the science side of me, they all seem man-made, right? And so unless I'm going to put the conspiracy theories, which could be a totally different podcast, we'll put those to the side for a second. This is not man-made, right? This is a virus that's spreading around the globe. There's no single incident or some sort of, banking or real estate collapse that the government's going to come in and just bail us out of. This is Mother Nature running a small purge cycle, right? And so I think my first question to you is this different? And then my follow-up to you is what historical data sources, or if anything, do we have to sort of model or predict or look at this?
Sure. Okay. So you're right that our last conversation was focused more on the threatening situations, which they are created situations.
Mm-hmm.
This conversation, because of current events, we're talking more about systemic crises. So there's a threatening crises and there's systemic crises. We have a number of historical precedents to look at for systemic crises, but let's talk about what is systemic. It's something that happens naturally. So, for example, an ambulance on its way to the hospital with somebody in the back, they need to get to that hospital. And those tires, if they have a flat tire because of natural wear and tear, this is a systemic crisis. The tires were degrading. It's just Mother Nature. We can expand that to be a storm is Mother Nature. So think like Hurricane Sandy. When Hurricane Sandy hit, it's not like the market's going to drop just because of a storm. We all know storms are not out to get us. We're not scared of the next storm. But with systemic crises, the thing to look for is when the crisis goes from being natural and something that just happens that's not out to get us to it's affecting our financial infrastructure directly. As soon as that happens, then we've got the crisis. And so that's why this is not different. So Hurricane Sandy, it sweeps in, no problems until it actually comes right up the Hudson and hits the New York Stock Exchange. Now we've got a crisis, and the market reflects that. With this systemic crisis, what we have is the virus, and it's very clear if you make a chart of the S&P 500 from January 1st, from December 31st, when it was first reported to the World Health Organization, you can see that S&P 500 has no connection to what's going on with the virus. None. Until quarantine is real in Italy. When quarantine hits, people understand immediately, okay, that means that things are stopping. We're not going to have supplies. This is an issue. This is affecting financial infrastructure. Once we see the quarantine happen, then we have the financial markets participating in the panic and the bear market. So that the pattern, it's right there. It's absolutely the normal pattern. The question, of course, is what is the impact in terms of the numbers? If we could predict the future, we'd be able to say, well, here's the bottom, but we can't predict the future.
That's right. Oh, man. And if my research does me right, the last sort of virus pandemic or last virus incident that we've had to deal with was this Spanish influenza, and that's 1918, where there's a 33-point drop in the market. I'm curious as to, based off of these more systemic crises, these things that have come naturally, what do data sources or what does our past say as far as outcomes and responses? I mean, do you feel based off of, previous experiences and your research that we are now on the climb of this? Or do you have any insight or output into sort of expectations, based off of previous crisis? Here's what you can expect in this one.
Well, before I answer that question, let's talk a little bit more about the historical diseases and viruses that we've dealt with.
Please.
So to go backwards in time, 2009 was H1N1 swine flu. It killed almost 300,000 people. It still exists today. It is part of our every year inoculation. Before that was MERS. Before that was SARS. And McKinsey Consulting Company recently put out some charts that they're using with their Fortune 500 clients. The CEOs are saying to their consultants, hey, give me something that I can use to help in my decision making for the 30,000 or 100,000 employees that that are looking to me for guidance. And so McKinsey goes to CDC and WHO, and they put together some charts. Well, one of them shows all these viruses, and they rank them by contagiousness and by deadliness. And so this disease that is currently, or this virus, I should say, that is currently causing so much havoc, it is less contagious and less deadly than MERS and H1N1 and SARS, but it is slightly more contagious and slightly more deadly than the regular flu. Okay, so we have a lot to look at as far as how do we react to these viruses. I mean, none of those other viruses saw the kind of market reaction that we're seeing now. If we go back in time and we really look at the Spanish influenza, the idea that the market dropped because of the influenza is a really tough sell. But I know that there are internet articles that they say that. But when you really look at the span at which the Spanish influenza was happening, I mean, it was quite a while.
Right.
And for all those years that it was affecting the globe, the fact that there was a drop in there, there are plenty of scholars that say that that drop was not because of the Spanish flu. It was related to, the typical going-ons at that time. It was a bear market that had nothing to do with the virus. And so scholars have their ideas on that. For my own research, I look at a catalyst. When do we find out about the virus, and does it affect something directly that we can connect to the market? And in the Spanish flu didn't. So we don't really have a catalyst where we can coherently prove, okay, the market dropped because of the flu. We really make that connection, but we can say that there was a market drop around the same time period because the flu existed for almost a decade. The Spanish influenza was around for almost a decade. And, and so we can say that those two things had, occupied some of the same time, but I don't think it's fair to say that one caused the other.
That's, that's great insight. And, you can kind of hear, I mentioned on the last podcast, you've done, 12 years of research in this crisis response. And, you can hear it coming out of you, which, and that's why we've got you here. I've got, if I open up my, when I mentioned you're coming on the podcast, I found, as expected, there are two ends of the spectrum, two types of people that have reached out. Those that have entered a place of struggle, those that have lost their job, or I've got people close to me that are entering or close to retirement, right? They're in retirement. There's lots of fear in that category.
Yeah.
There's lots of pain. There's a lot going on there. The other end of the spectrum is this group of people. I'd like to maybe even put myself in that bucket, that we've more or less been planning for something like this, right? Not necessarily a virus or something this violent or chaotic, but we spent probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes on our last call talking about timing the market or planning for some sort of market disaster, and finding an opportunity to capitalize on. So I want to do my best to, here over the next few minutes, to unpack both of those buckets there, and ask some questions and get some information for both sides of these. I definitely want to start on the more important side of this, which is the struggle side of this, right? This morning, I read The Hustle and Trends, and issue 40 of the Trends came out yesterday. I read it this morning, and this is a quote from them. It says that one of the top government officials estimates that 30% of Americans could lose their job at the end of this chaos. That would be 3x more than the Great Recession. While we see this giant pivot in the market, right? People becoming entrepreneurs or solopreneurs and picking up these really interesting side gigs. They're building their skill sets. They're reinventing themselves, right? I guess I want to maybe open the floor here and get your advice on, first, for the folks that have followed your advice on the last podcast. They're paying off multiple masters. They're paying off their loans. They're paying off their emergency fund. They're investing. We've been told never touch your retirement or your emergency fund. This feels retirement fund-esque, right? This sounds like a silly question, but this definitely feels retire fund-esque. It feels like this may be a time, if it's required or if you start feeling a bit of pressure, that it's okay to tap into that retirement fund.
Well, when I hear people talk about, how do I handle myself because I'm scared and I'm in tough times. Maybe I have lost my job. Maybe I've just been laid off, but I expect to be able to go back once, the restaurant opens again or once the hotel opens again. One of the things that I think of is that this is what emergency funds are for. So if they have saved for, 3 months of expenses, then that really makes a difference as far as fear. It makes a big difference as far as desperation. So probably we're not needing to talk to that group of people. If they have an emergency account, then they know, hey, this is a time to use it. It's probably hard to use it. It probably makes them feel uncomfortable to, pull.
I am in that boat, man. Actually, I'm very stubborn, and I've been told, never touch your emergency fund, never touch your retirement account. And I feel I would need, as silly as it sounds, I would need the nod. I would need the nod of approval from someone else to say, yeah, man, it's probably time to tap into that. I mean, for me, that's don't look at it, don't touch at it. It doesn't exist, right? And so even I feel I'm not there, but at a time of having pressure put on me, I would still not want to touch that. I can feel me fighting it, right? So I think, yeah, as tough as it may be, if you need to, it's okay to lift the emergency fund cover.
Yeah, that's right. And so if you've got the emergency funds and you're choosing to go into debt, wow, that'd be a tough choice. That's you're hurting yourself. Don't take in debt. Use the emergency fund and then later replenish your fund. But if they don't have an emergency fund, then there's probably a little bit of math that they need to do, because my bet is they've got credit card capability. They've got the ability to use short-term debt. And so the question becomes, is it better to use that short-term debt? Is it better to pull out of the retirement account? And a little bit of math will help to figure that out. Everybody's situation is different with what their interest rates are on the debt. Some retirement plans permit you to take a loan against it. And so your retirement plan stays in place, but you've got a loan that then your future contributions to pay it off. So, there's different options there that, that are useful. Where in talking with, for example, like a client's neighbor or a client's friend, where they're really in this kind of a situation, what I like to try to do is focus on the non-money side, because I really think that moments like these, it's less about resources and it's more about resourcefulness. What time are you waking up? How do you start your day? What are you doing with your time? How do you make sure that your every moment is a productive movement in the direction that gets you closer to the goals that matter. Because a lot of times when you get into those conversations, you uncover that some of their personal anxiety comes from just the lack of focus. They're sleeping in, they're staying up late, they're binge watching Netflix. They're not doing the things that are appropriate for someone in an emergency situation. And inside, they know that. And I think you have to have that conversation to open up the door and show them, look, right now, it's not happening the way it should be. And it has nothing to do with the crisis. Walk through this door and be the person that you want to be, and stop spending time, eating potato chips on the sofa, and spend that time in a way that's valuable. And if their question comes back, well, but I don't know what to do. Now we're having the right conversation, because now it's about resourcefulness. It's no longer about, do I have the money? Let's be resourceful. You have the capability. You're in one of the best countries in the globe for opportunity. And yes, we're in a crisis, but that doesn't mean that we can't use this time in a valuable way. And one of my favorite things to do when I'm not sure how to make my time valuable is to network. And nowadays, you can do that with just open up an account on LinkedIn and start talking to people. It's so easy to grow a network. I opened up Twitter, maybe it was Christmas time last year. I mean, it was not 3 months ago. And I had 1,000 followers in just a few weeks. This is growing your space, being able to influence, being able to tell important people, here's what I'm good at, where's opportunity for me. And now you're going to get that opportunity easier, because the whole point is connectedness. And that's a good thing about social media. There's a lot of negativity about social media these days, because supposedly this is a part of what makes this virus different. But if one of your listeners is in this place of fear, my suggestion is hold yourself accountable to the days that are going by, because you can accomplish a lot. You can make a meaningful difference, not just for you, but take the spotlight off yourself. There's others in the community far worse off than you are, and you can do so much for them. It's incredible. Some of these amazing people getting food out to others, and just really having a positive impact. And you never know, the person that is alongside you as you're helping getting food to the elderly, they've got a business and they need someone. And who are they going to hire?
Come from the same sort of blood of the grind, right? I talk about it in every single episode, the grind, endure the grind, and stay on your grind. I love I love your take on just get off the couch and move, right? Get off the couch and work. I had Dory Clark, who, a best-selling book author. She's an incredible guest on the podcast. And she talked about how she started this. She's a very wealthy sort of touring author and speaker now. And early in her career, she was at a marketing consulting firm. And the U.S. wasn't going through any sort of crisis, but her vertical was, and they were having massive layoffs. They called her in at the time. She was crushing it. She was top of the leaderboard, and she thought she was getting a promotion. She was cut. She was let go. And caught just a left hook out of left. Just had no idea it was coming. And to your point, didn't go. She didn't take the L, right? She didn't sulk about it. She turned around. She made something of herself, and now she runs her own marketing consulting firm, as well as she's got 7 figures of income. She talked about. I think my point being, you during a time like this, you have the opportunity. You're sitting inside. You're on the couch. If you're not essential, then you've been sent home and you're not doing much. You've got sort of 2 paths you can take there. The path that I assumed and I rattled off earlier is that people are self-improving, right? And they're reading books, and they're taking these free classes that all these colleges have put online for us, and these museum tours, and they're doing all this, just improving yourself. Or there are a lot of good series that have come on Netflix, and you could just binge the mess out of this for the next 30 days and not get anything out of it. And so I think, to your point, how you approach this situation is going to compound. I mean, you're going to see effects immediately, and then it's going to compound for you over the coming months. How you handle the next 30 days.
Compound is my favorite word.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to, if I could talk about we started this by talking about two ends of the spectrum. I want to maybe close off on the hurting end of this, if I can. Those that are coming off some sort of debt. They still have debt. We spent time on the last podcast talking about paying multiple masters, being able to pay off debt, being able to invest. We also talked about how really your sort of first tool in your arsenal to get rid of debt is that snowball method. During a time like this, knowing we're not sure when the end date is going to be, and cash on hand or liquidity it feels more important today. Are you still recommending, or would you still recommend that we look to pay off that loan or that debt as fast as possible? Or is this a time that maybe you would suggest we look to scale back and move to the minimum, or that debt minimum, that loan minimum, until things sort of subside and we feel a bit more comfortable?
Well, I don't think there's a absolutely correct answer to that. So for example, for people like me and you that we just would have a real hard time diving into that emergency fund, I'll bet there are listeners out there that they wouldn't be comfortable not paying, their snowball plan and sticking to it. They want to stick to it, and there's nothing to stop them from sticking to it, and that's okay. Um, Especially if they're still working, especially if even though they're in quarantine, they're still making it happen. They still have a wage. Things are hard and things are different, but the big things are still in place, and they can stick to their snowball plan. Well, then that makes sense to me that they would. On the other side, there could be folks that they are laid off. They know they're in a transition, and so of course it makes sense that they would not be putting extra to the debt, but just pay all the minimum amounts that need to be paid, and hold on to their liquidity to help them with this transition. That seems to make good sense. What also makes good sense that not many people are talking about these days is the ability to control your debt that is available to us right now. So our nation knows that this is a tough time. The banking community especially knows that they have a chance to do good, and banks want to do good. I mean, they know what happens when the public starts to think that they're no good. So they want to do good. So when somebody calls their bank and says, I've been paying, I even was paying extra, but here's the thing with the coronavirus, I'm at home. What can I do to get a reprieve? And you'd be surprised, when you offer that in good faith, what you get back in good faith. They'll give you, the next two payments don't need to be made, or they'll lower the interest rate, or they'll lower the payment. They'll make it so, okay, well, all you have is interest only for the rest of this calendar year, but the next year we go back to principal and interest. There's so much they can do, and they're willing to do it for two reasons. One is it's good for business, and they understand that better than they ever have in history. But secondly, because they're people too, and I mean, this is not a just affecting some issue. We're all in quarantine. Social media is kind of all connected, and they want to help.
Yeah, I love the advice that you're pulling from, purposefully or not. I got that idea from I can't remember if it's 4 Hour Work Week or if it was from Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich. But he talks about almost verbatim what you're talking about here, of if you find yourself in some sort of complication or issue, or you find fees on a card, or you're behind the ball, approaching, so rather than just paying the fee and kind of sitting on it, circling back to your provider. And I mean, you hit it right on the head. I've done this twice as I've changed my banking structure. I've recently changed checking and savings accounts and all this stuff. And as I'm moving things around, sometimes my automation, paying my credit cards off, everything got funky. And I had several times where fees just fell through. And I circled back and talked to my bank and gave that exact spiel you just went through there of, listen, if you look through my history, I've never missed a payment. In fact, I've paid in full throughout our entire history together. I've upgraded cards. Here's what I've done. In saying all of that, here's what's happened recently and what's going on and what I'm trying to do. What can we do to get this solved? I mean, and before I could even finish, what could we do to get, they were removing it, right? So to your point, man, I think a lot of the times it's just about picking up the phone and becoming personable and calling in and sitting on that, hour-long wait line that, that most companies have right now and having that conversation. And I think you'd be shocked at what comes through the other side. I want to shift gears really quickly. If we talked about one end of the spectrum, I guess before I even shift, is there anything else that we should or could cover for that side or for those folks? I want to make sure that I maximize that. Is there anything else worth covering there?
Well, boy, those are my favorite questions. Is the kind of like, hey, did we miss something? And I always love that challenge of, hey, I'll find something that we missed. But,
yeah, sure. I've got a really good one at the end of this.
I think we've had a great conversation. If nothing else, I'm on podcasts regularly, and I just really enjoy your approach. It's so easy to speak with you. I just not that we've had a beer together yet. I hope it gets to happen, but it's just a pleasure, and I feel like you've covered this well.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I wish I could I'll take some of the credit, but I've got a lot of folks sending in kick-ass questions, really good following. So I feel I just arrive and I'm the messenger at this point. It's been a really, really cool experience. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Let's kind of talk about the other side of this. And if I could be selfish for a second, this is the side. If this was an hour long Josh and Chris call, this is where I'd want to spend my time. In the last podcast, I framed a question up of timing the market. And we kind of walked through how silly that idea was, because how unpredictable or not predictable the market is. At the time, we made the point of we're in the midst of a record-setting, 11, 12-year bull market, in that there's no rule or law to say that this couldn't continue to climb. And obviously, it made sense. Now we're on the other side of this coin, right? And the market has dropped. There's no rule or law to say that it can't continue to drop. But if I could backtrack 29 days, and I framed that question of, could we time the market? We're kind of there, right? I not knowing where this goes, for those that were looking for that opportunity or felt, man, I'm going to sit on this and I need an opportunity. From Josh's perspective, and I'm no expert, this feels like an opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's you're preaching to the choir. I mean, that's my book rests on the idea that, it's impossible to time the market because there's all these, competing motivations amongst the investors. And so you never know where the market's going at any given time, except for one time. And that's in crisis. When you have a crisis, then it brings us all together. And for a short period, we act in concert. And there's a very clear pattern that absolutely is something that we can capitalize on. And here at my firm, we've been doing that. And I think that when people get a chance to read the book, they'll feel a little bit more comfortable about doing it. It's not rocket science. It's not like this is something that is beyond people. It's very straightforward. When you've got A and B, well, then be looking for the downturn per your risk profile. You decide where you're getting in, and just make sure you're real clear where you're going to get out. And I think if people were, following my book's principles specifically, like I'm just going to do exactly what the book says, then they would have gotten in the Monday that that the oil dispute was published. And they would have gotten out less than 48 hours later, because there was a nice uptick that happened afterwards. They would have made their profit and moved on.
Listen to that. I've joked a couple times, just here in conversation and talking to people through our page. that I feel that we've somewhat traveled back in time. If I look at the S&P 500, it sits today as of March 25th, where again, my just low level research here, where it was at sometime like August, September of 2017. And so we've kind of done this silly explanation here, but we've kind of we've time traveled back, 2.5 years to 2017, to where you can drop money and at some point, again, not knowing when, not and neither, but just kind of shooting in the wind here in the next couple of years, the market is going to climb back up, right? As we band together and we unite and we find a solution and we come out of this quarantine, that things are going to improve. And as the market level sets and it continues to climb and we set a new record, we fast forward and you've regained. We've traveled back in time to capture those that couldn't invest in 2017. This is your chance.
Yeah, it's a great chance. It's interesting that your phraseology is the market as a whole. I think that the market as a whole is probably not as guaranteed as what maybe it sounds like you're thinking. And a great way to look at that would be to look at Japan's stock market and look for their high, which you might see in the 90s, and see how long it took after the fall. How long did it take to come back? Because it might be it still has not gotten back. I need to look at that again, but we're talking 20 years. Because the market
that's great insight.
Yeah, the market as a whole is different than when you're looking at the component parts. So, for example, and that's the difference of top down versus bottom up. But bottom up, I think we can comfortably say that from March the 12th until last Friday, buying Exxon, buying Chevron was a great idea.
Yeah.
Even if today the market wasn't up, it was a great idea. 2-3 years from now, we'll all be very happy about those purchases. And so that's less about the market in general as it is about the specific capabilities of a leadership team and the assets that they own and what they have in their market share. How much dividend they pay out. Those things. You can really get some good bargains right now. And that now I'm starting to sound like every other talking head that is out there at the moment. But there's a reason so many people are saying that.
Yeah, you're actually hitting on my number one most submitted question. I'll ask it now as we kind of segue into it. When I open the floor to everybody, my number one most submitted question was, how do we maximize this downturn? And so I think if I could maybe explain or unpack several of the questions a bit for those that have built wealth, and let's just talk about me, right, or whoever, those that have built a little bit of wealth, they've built a little bit of disposable income. You can hear just through your conversation there was a time Chevron makes sense. There's a time Boeing makes sense. There's a time this market is ever fluctuating. And what was a good investment last Friday, it may not make sense to get in anymore. So timing is everything here. But I guess I'm going to do sort of a broad stroke question here as it was submitted. For those that have built a little disposable income, what are some things that they should or could keep an eye on for some sort of dip and know this is a good investment, or this is something I should put my money into, right? I think that's the biggest hesitation of do I go with an individual stock or do I put this in index funds? And this is such a complicated question, right? Because it's, well, what's your risk tolerance, so on and so forth. So I'm doing sort of a broad stroke here of those looking to achieve this FIRE status. If we have a bit of disposable income, we catch this downturn, we're in the midst of this crisis, we're able to buy what feels like almost anything within this US market at a discount. Obviously not everything, but lots is going at a much cheaper rate. Do you have any sort of favorites or things that maybe we should keep our eyes on?
Sure. I don't mind, just kind of going name by name with you and, see what you think. But first, to talk procedurally, I would I would venture to guess that most of your listening audience, their most common way of engaging with the market is through, you know, index style investing. So, think of like the Vanguard funds or, the ETFs that capture a big, huge piece of the market with just a few dollars. And that is the right way to do it. If they've been investing for the last decade, they're doing it the right way. There's no problem with that. But this is not the time to water down the risk. This is the time to go ahead and take on the risk. The old saying of be greedy when everyone is panicking. This is the time to avoid the big indexes because I mean the index could from here if it went back to its all time high. I mean that's not as much of a move as what you could get with some of the stellar global not going away individual equities. And so just to give you an idea of some of the names that everybody is talking about and what I think, I'll just kind of add to this is that everyone has an opinion. My opinion isn't better than the next guy's, but maybe my thoughts will resonate or get somebody to do a little more homework, and just help them with their choices as they're considering what they're up to. The other thing I'd add is, I can't give advice to people through a podcast, because I don't know them. It's not that I'm going to say, buy this, because it's not advice. It's just more sharing with you some thoughts on these companies. So just kind of going through a random list here. BP. I mean, I think if they're buying BP below $25 a share, they should be happy. Boeing, I loved buying Boeing below 100, and I'm a seller above 150. People that were looking at Boeing at 300 or 200, I think there's underlying issues with Boeing that are going to take a little while to sort through. If you've got a long time to sit on the investment, then I mean, sure, I also think Boeing is not going away, but there's probably a lot of other companies that you can get good dividends from. Boeing's not going to pay you a dividend for a while. As an example would be like Dow. That dividend is almost 10%, and if you're buying that below 30, I mean, you've got to be happy. J.P. Morgan Chase. I mean, this is a fantastic bank, in my opinion. The dividend is a little bit off what I'd like to see, so I'd probably be more comfortable buying a bit lower than where it is now. But if I could get a 4% dividend from them, I'd be happy. Carnival, everybody, of course, knows that this crisis has affected Carnival. To me, if you're owning Carnival below $16 a share, that's a good place. It'll come back. You might not get your dividend for a year or two. AT&T, a bellwether stock that is involved in so many people's lives all over the planet, right now is going to pay you a 7% dividend or more. If you can get that stock below 30, it seems like a really great price. Chevron will be the last one I mention, unless you want me to keep going. But Chevron, below 70, come on, you're getting over 7%. And we already mentioned Exxon. To me, buying Exxon in the 30s or the high 20s is a steal. I mean, it's like going to the grocery store and finding out that your favorite cereal is 5 for 1.
Yeah, right. I went all of this. I showed up with a much more rookie list, and you checked off most of them. But I didn't hear airlines, which I thought was I thought that was a really interesting one. And I'm not sure dividends or anything of that nature. I do know most airlines, Spirit and United, I mean, they were just being chopped. Any thoughts, or does that seem like it's more of a riskier type of play, or is that something that on the list just didn't get rattled off?
Well, I think the airlines are a tough one for me personally because I do fly, and every time I get on a plane, I see problems with the operation at the airport. I see problems with, how they treat their customers. The only company that I like is Southwest. And what's so funny is it seems like LUV was affected the least in the.
I was going to say that. Yeah, that's funny. That's
Yeah. So if they had come down, I would have loved to buy them, but otherwise, maybe people that just want to try to grab something for on the cheap, they could get American Airlines. AAL is they're not going to go away, but I'd rather own companies that I just feel like they're just fantastic top to bottom.
Yeah. And I think the list you gave off, I really appreciate you diving into that. I think that was great. I know I'm coming up on 60-ish seconds left with you. I promised you I had another open-ended question. On my last podcast 30 days ago, I closed with a really simple question of, what have I not asked that I need to know? Your answer, you quoted back, it was Peggy Newman, and you gave a sort of rough outline of, you can't be intelligent and look around and see all the chaos between weapons and treaties and disease and not think that a bad day is coming. It is coming. And it's sort of surreal, 29, 30 days later, we're here. It was very Yoda-like of you. And so I want to, I want to kind of maybe try it again. And let's re-ask the question to you and maybe open the floor to you again in that, what have I not asked, or what else, should we or could we know here?
Well, I doubt I'll be able to re-Yoda.
Yeah, man, that's a tough one, isn't it?
But what I'll mention is we're having a special talk here because we're right in the thick of things with this reaction to quarantine and the energy drop and the virus itself, and so what is real normal from here forward is a lot of scary news. It's normal. So, just trying to make stuff up. I don't know what the future holds, but the flu, every year we have to get an inoculation. The reason for that is because it changes. The flu virus, it adapts and changes. And so we have to get a new flu shot to account for how the virus has changed. This is our battle against that virus. Well, the coronavirus is the same kind of virus. And it would not be surprising to hear that it has changed. That, hey, you got sick with the coronavirus, but now it's mutated and it's different. And the word mutated is very scary. And so, wouldn't it be normal to see that on social media, to see people say, oh, it's mutated, and to maybe find that there's another burst of panic? That is absolutely part of this. When 9/11 happened, how many days were there where we had a fresh round of panic? It's totally normal. And so if I could ask you and anyone who gets to hear our conversation to really find your strength, your place of calm, and be a member of the community that others can rely on. We're all holed up because of quarantine, but we don't have to hole up, in every way that matters. We can do right. We can be helpful. We can, remember that logic prevails over instinct, and that practice prevails over the irrational response. So practice mindfulness, and wait and see. A year from now, this will feel like ancient history, but it's going to be a little bit longer, I bet.
Yeah, man, you're the man. You mentioned having a beer earlier. I feel I owe you a few beers at this point. This is exactly what we needed. This will be the first time that I've turned around a episode or a podcast. This is as fast as my team can actually move. We'll have it turned around in what is it, 7 days. So I can't thank you enough for doing this. I asked you last week. I maybe want to give you the chance again for the folks that want to find you, maybe tune in to more of your content, or they really enjoyed the conversation. They just want to connect with you. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, if you Google my name, Chris Manske, Manske, that's a great way to find me. You could Google The Prepared Investor. That's a great way to find me and get information about the book. My publisher says the book is launching the first week of August, but my agent says they're just full of it. It's going to happen the first week of October. So, in fall, the book launches, and and I'd love to think that there's a book or two that sells because of the time with you. I mean, that would be a joy.
I'm going to say this. Good luck finding it on the shelf. I'm under the impression, I wrote this down. I'm under the impression that from, obviously you're the real deal. And even more so with what we're currently going through, whether it's subsided by August or October, or if we're still in the, in the heart of it. Man, you're the real deal, and you're talking on this. I mean, you're hitting the nail right on the head. I've got a note jotted down to, prepared investors coming out this fall, but good luck finding it. My recommendation would be pre-order that bad boy if you're interested, because I would suspect, just based off of everything that's going on, man, that I'd suspect that thing's flying off the shelves.
Well, I like how you think. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I really appreciate it. For the listeners, as always, I can't thank you enough for plugging me in your ears. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you could find me at info@rhodestowealth.com. Please continue to submit your questions and comments there. I'd love and appreciate the feedback. I hope each and every one of you is having a happy and healthy time through this interesting time. Hug the loved one tight and stay on that grind.
I don't think I could have written a better script here. I mean, Chris did a great job in part one last week in his episode. Man, came back just guns a-blazing. This is exactly what I was expecting and hoping for when I was preparing over the last few days, coming into this podcast. I mean, he hit the nail right on the head. Great insight into from someone that has their ear truly to the ground here, and they understand all the variables and everything floating within the market. Great insight into just what he sees, what he's expecting, some of the data points and graphs and things that he's using from our past to look at our present and our future. Even more so, I mean, how great was it that how granular he was willing to get for us on both those that need the assistance, right? Some steps and things that you could be taking, the math that you could be doing behind. Should I be looking at my retirement? Should I take out a loan? Should I look at my emergency fund? I mean, just great actionable steps. And what I was most excited for, trying to extract some of his investing tips without. I mean, obviously he can't give anything specific, but I mean, how great. I couldn't write my notes fast enough. I've listened to this podcast now a couple times. How great is it as he's running through specific stocks, specific sort of points that you should be looking for as they clips this, get in, right? Dividends and the numeric value, dollars per share that you could be looking for. I mean, I couldn't have gotten better content from him. I appreciate Chris's time. I've circled back. I've given him some thanks. I want to echo that thank you to the listeners here. As always, if you have a second, drop me a review. Check out my website. Leave a comment. That always helps me. More importantly, if this conversation has sparked any interest, if there's something that we should double down on, if we should chase, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Questions that come up, things that have surfaced in your day-to-day, I'm really looking to make this a platform for us all. info@rhodestowealth.com is where you can find me. I've got social media everywhere. If nothing else, stay on that grind.
So smooth. Tell them it's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. For my kids and my spouse, yeah. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health, yeah. For my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound, it's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. For my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. If life about purpose, it give you something to seek in. I've been setting cash goals, financially speaking. I've been finding blessings through all of these demons. I pray to God, I give you something to reach with. Say I give you something to leave with. This life about goals and achievements. Your eyes on the prize, they hate out your mind and pray to whatever beliefs in. Teach on the way, know that the beach on the way gotta shine hard in the teacher's water. Know that little seed, they gon' grow tomorrow. So every day gotta come with us. So they give you something to stand on. Make the false off when you land raw. Make you put some new friends on. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health, yeah. For my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. For my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. You the bad dad.